The diner was almost silent when it happened, the kind of quiet that only comes in small towns on slow afternoons. Plates clinked gently. An old fan buzzed lazily above, and sunlight spilled through dusty windows like golden ribbons. At a corner table, Steven Seagal sat alone, calmly eating his lunch. Nothing flashy, no bodyguards, no cameras, just a simple meal and a moment of peace. Then the peace broke. The door to Maple Ridge Diner slammed open so hard that every spoon in the place rattled. 5 teenagers stormed inside, loud, restless, hyper with the kind of energy that comes from boredom, arrogance, and too much attention online. They weren't here to eat. They weren't here to sit. They were here to stir trouble, and the entire diner felt it instantly. They laughed loudly, pushing each other, knocking into empty chairs as they scanned the room for entertainment. Their phones were already recording. Content. They called it. Chaos was their favorite kind. And then they saw him. The oldest teen nudged the others and pointed. "Yo, look at that old guy eating alone. Bro thinks he's in a movie." The others snickered. They didn't recognize him. Not yet. Steven didn't look up, didn't react. He simply lifted his sandwich, took a calm bite, and continued enjoying his quiet moment. But to arrogant teens, calmness is a challenge. They approached his table in a loose circle, blocking the light, blocking the air, blocking the peace he'd been enjoying. One leaned closer. "Hey, old man. Nice lunch." Another grinned. "Mind if we try some?" Before anyone in the diner could blink, one teen snatched the sandwich right out of Steven's hand, tore off a piece, and tossed it to the floor like garbage. The others burst into laughter. Customers gasped. A waitress froze with a tray in her hands. Then another teen flicked Steven's drink with 2 fingers, tipping the entire cup over the table. The liquid spread across the wood, dripping onto his lap and the floor. Still, Steven didn't move. No anger, no shouting, just a slow, steady breath, the kind that made even the loudest teenager hesitate for a moment. But arrogance blinds. The leader stepped closer and whispered to his friends, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Record this. This is about to go viral." What happened next left all 5 of them terrified. The Maple Ridge Diner had always been the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. A bell rang softly each time the door opened. The booths smelled faintly of old leather, and the waitresses greeted every customer like family. Outside, the town buzzed slowly. Inside, everyone felt safe. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for late breakfasts, where families gathered after Sunday church, and where old friends argued about weather predictions more than politics. On this particular day, though, something felt different, an odd tension in the air no one could quite place. Steven Seagal had slipped quietly into the diner earlier, unnoticed by most. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans, a dark jacket, and a black cap pulled low. No one realized who he was, and even if they did, Steven wasn't the type to draw attention. He preferred silence over noise, tea over drama, and calm over confrontation, especially today. After weeks of non-stop travel, he wanted nothing more than a peaceful lunch in a quiet corner. He chose the booth near the window, where sunlight painted soft lines across the table. He ordered a sandwich, a cup of steaming herbal tea, and most importantly, solitude. For roughly 20 minutes, that solitude existed. Then the teenagers arrived. The bell above the door didn't just ring, it practically screamed as the door was shoved open with unnecessary force. Heads turned instantly. 5 teens burst in, each one louder than the next. They carried their phones like weapons, pointed outward, ready to capture anything they could turn into a moment of online fame. They weren't from the town. Everyone could see that. They wore expensive sneakers, flashy jackets, and attitudes even louder than their outfits. The kind of attitudes that didn't grow from hardship or struggle but from screens, followers, and the belief that consequence was optional. The leader, a tall boy with a sharp jawline and too much confidence, scanned the diner with narrowed eyes. His friends flanked him like a pack, laughing, pushing, shoving, filming. An older couple near the counter flinched when the boys brushed past them. A young mother pulled her toddler closer. A bus driver shook his head silently. The teens didn't care. They were looking for entertainment. And that's when they saw him, the quiet man in the corner booth, eating slowly, calmly, peacefully, alone. The leader's lips curved into a smirk. "Yo, check this out," he whispered to his group, though his voice was loud enough to echo. "Grandpa's having a picnic." The others snickered, nudging each other. Their cameras lifted at once. Steven heard them, of course. He noticed every footstep, every whisper, every shadow crossing his table. But he did what he always did, breathed slowly, and stayed still. Peace, after all, isn't something you fight for with anger. The tallest teen swaggered forward until he stood inches from Steven's table. He didn't speak at first, he simply hovered there, staring like he was waiting for Steven to react. But Steven just kept eating. That irritated him. "Yo, you deaf or something?" he said, leaning forward. Steven lifted his eyes slowly. Not in challenge, just acknowledgement. "Excuse me, boys," he said with calm politeness. "I'm trying to enjoy my lunch." The politeness made them laugh harder. "Enjoy?" Another teen repeated mockingly. "In this old man diner? Bro, we're doing you a favor, giving you attention." The smallest one grabbed Steven's cup of tea, looked at it, sniffed it, then dramatically poured it onto the floor. The liquid spread under the table like a slow-moving puddle of disrespect. Steven didn't flinch. A faint murmur rippled through the diner. People exchanged worried glances. A nervous waitress whispered to another, "Do something." But neither dared approach. The leader cracked his knuckles. "What's up, old man? You too scared to say something?" Steven set his hands calmly on the table. "I don't believe in disrespecting anyone," he said quietly. "And I don't intend to start today." The boys laughed harder than before, as if his calmness was fuel to their fire. Then the moment that shifted everything happened, the kind of moment a room never forgets. The leader reached out, grabbed Steven's plate, and hurled his food onto the ground. The sandwich, the simple meal Steven had been quietly enjoying, hit the floor with a soft thud. The entire diner fell silent. Even the teens paused for a split second. Not out of guilt, but out of anticipation. And that's when a woman in the next booth whispered to her husband, "Those boys, they're about to make the biggest mistake of their lives." But the teens didn't hear her. They were too busy laughing, too busy recording, too busy believing they were invincible. Steven looked down at his ruined meal for a long moment. Then he looked up at the 5 boys, one by one. Not with anger, not with fear, just with a silence so steady it felt louder than their mockery. One teen stepped forward, raising his phone and smirking. "Record this," he told his friends with excitement. "This is going to go viral." If only they knew. The next few minutes would become a memory they would never be able to erase. The diner felt colder now, as if the air itself sensed what was coming. Every customer watched with held breath, waiting for the reaction that never came. Steven Seagal sat still, his eyes tracing the ruined sandwich on the floor. His fingers relaxed on the table, his breathing even. There was no tension in his body, but there was something else, something the teens were too naive to recognize. Control, the kind that only comes from years of discipline, training, and surviving situations far worse than 5 loud boys with phones. But to the teens, Steven's calm looked like weakness, and arrogant kids always mistake silence for fear. The leader stepped closer, his shadow falling dully over Steven's table. "What's wrong, old man?" he taunted. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you too scared to stand up for yourself?" Steven raised his gaze slowly, not with intimidation but with patience. "You boys don't want to do this," he said softly. "Walk away. Enjoy your day. Don't let a small mistake become a big one." The teens erupted into laughter. One of them slapped the leader's back. "Bro, he's trying to sound wise, like he's in some ninja movie." Another leaned into Steven's personal space, waving his phone inches from his face. "Say something cool for the camera, man. Come on, give us a quote." Steven didn't move, didn't blink, didn't entertain. He simply said, "Respect is not difficult. It just requires choice." That sentence, simple, calm, measured, irritated the boys more than any insult could have. "Respect," the leader scoffed. "Bro, you're eating alone in a dusty diner. Respect yourself first." A low murmur traveled through the customers. A trucker rose halfway from his seat as if ready to intervene, but his wife grabbed his arm and whispered, No, let him handle it. I think he knows what he's doing." The teens were too busy taunting to notice the warning in her voice. One of the boys shoved Steven's shoulder lightly. "Stand up," he demanded. Steven didn't react. The boy pushed a little harder. "I said get up." Steven exhaled slowly through his nose, the calmness around him almost unnatural. "Young man, he said quietly. "I won't say this again. You should not do that." The leader rolled his eyes and gestured to his friends. "Bro, this guy is slow. Let's help him stand." Before anyone could blink, two of the teens grabbed Steven's arms and tugged, expecting him to stumble. But Steven didn't move an inch. Not a flinch, not a shake, not even the tiniest shift in posture. It was like trying to move a granite statue. The boys exchanged confused glances. "What the?" "Pull harder." They yanked with both hands. Steven remained still. The leader laughed nervously. "Yo, why is he so heavy?" A woman whispered from the counter. "Because he's not normal. Look at his stance. Look at how he's breathing." The teens didn't listen. Their insecurities pushed them forward. The leader, frustrated and embarrassed, stepped in and shoved Steven harder than anything he had done so far. And that was the moment everything changed. Steven's chair slid a mere inch, not because of the shove, but because Steven allowed it. The teen, however, stumbled backward, as if he had pushed into pure steel. He caught himself on the edge of another table, knocking over a salt shaker. The whole diner gasped. "What the heck?" one of the boys muttered. He didn't even move. Now embarrassed, the leader lunged again, raising his hand to shove Steven once more, but he never made contact, because Steven moved. Not fast, not aggressively, just gracefully. With a single subtle motion, Steven lifted his arm and caught the boy's wrist between his fingers, softly, gently, effortlessly, as if guiding a child. Everything stopped. The leader froze, eyes wide. His friends froze. Customers froze. Even the humming ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. Steven held the boy's wrist with so little tension that it looked like he was barely touching him. But the pressure, the precision, the angle, made the teen drop to one knee instantly. A strangled gasp escaping his throat. Steven's voice was low, calm, and steady. "I told you not to do that." The other four boys stumbled backward in panic. What is he doing to him? Bro, he didn't even twist it. How is he kneeling? The leader tried to pull away, but Steven didn't tighten his grip. He simply shifted 2 fingers, barely a movement, and the boy winced again, choking on his own breath. Now fear began spreading across the teens' faces. Real fear. Not the kind they faked online, not the kind used in silly pranks, but the kind born from understanding that they had just provoked someone far beyond their comprehension. Steven released him gently. The boy staggered back, clutching his wrist, eyes wide with shock. What the hell are you?" Steven didn't answer. He simply looked at them quietly, patiently, with the kind of gaze that told 100 stories without speaking a single word. And that silence, that calm, terrified them far more than any threat could. The teens glanced at each other, finally beginning to realize they hadn't messed with an old man. They had messed with Steven Seagal. For several long seconds, the diner felt as if time had lost its courage to move forward. The leader of the teens crouched on one knee, clutching his wrist, breathing in tight, frightened gasps. His friends hovered behind him, their arrogant faces now pale. Eyes wide, lips trembling, not from pain, but from the sudden understanding that they had crossed a line they never should have approached. Steven Seagal sat back down slowly, adjusting his sleeves with the same quiet composure he had shown since they arrived. Not triumphant, not angry, not shaking with adrenaline like a person who had just defended himself. Just calm, too calm, and that calmness was more intimidating than any punch, shout, or threat the teens had seen in their short lives. The smallest boy, thin, curly-haired, always the one laughing the loudest, trembled so hard he nearly dropped his phone. The device, still recording, caught the moment clearly. The silent man who didn't flinch. The leader crumpled on one knee, and the diner frozen in fearful awe. The boy lowered the phone slowly. "Guys," he whispered, voice cracking, "we need to get out of here." But none of them moved. It was as if their sneakers had fused to the floor. Customers watched closely, unsure what to do. A waitress stood halfway behind the counter, her hand covering her mouth. A trucker sat rigid, gripping his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles whitened. Even an old man who had been eating soup paused with his spoon halfway to his lips. The entire building breathed as one. Steven glanced at the teens, not with hatred, not with violence, but with an expression they didn't know how to read, something between disappointment and warning. The leader swallowed hard, trying to regain some of the confidence he had lost. But when he tried to stand, a sharp jolt of pain shot through his wrist. He winced loudly, gripping it with his other hand. You broke it," he accused, voice quivering. Steven shook his head gently. "If I had broken it," he said softly, "you wouldn't be talking." A wave of fear washed through the teens so visibly that even the customers felt it. The tall boy with the red jacket was the first to crack. "Man, I told you he wasn't normal. I told you something was off," he hissed at his friends. The blonde teen shot back. "Bro, how are we supposed to know he's some kind of ninja grandpa?" Their confused panic would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. The leader clenched his jaw, embarrassed and terrified all at once. "He's just lucky," he muttered, though his voice betrayed him. A voice from the diner counter, old, shaky, but firm, cut through the tension. "No, son. He's not lucky. That man is Steven Seagal." The entire group of teens froze. "Wait. What? Just Steven Seagal? Like the movie guy? No way, bro. No way. That can't be him." The old man nodded. "I've seen every one of his films. I know that face anywhere." The teens stared at Steven again, this time with real recognition dawning on them. The quiet confidence, the controlled motions, the calm eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. The leader whispered to his friends, "Guys, that's really him. That's actually him." The blonde boy took a step back, nearly tripping over a chair. "Bro, we messed with Steven Seagal? Why would we do that? Why would anyone do that?" The curly-haired teen clutched his phone like a lifeline. "Delete the video. Delete the video right now," he begged the others. But Steven raised a hand, not threateningly, just enough to stop them. "You don't need to delete anything," he said quietly. "You need to learn something." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was heavier than any shout. The teen stood frozen in place as he continued. "Strength isn't for humiliating others. Power isn't for taking advantage. And respect begins with how you treat people when no one is watching." The leader looked down, face burning with shame. His friends stared at the floor. The diner remained silent, not out of fear anymore, but out of reverence. Steven took a slow sip of his water, as if the room wasn't suffocating with tension. He made no move to punish, no move to chase them, no move to intimidate. And somehow, that scared the teens even more. The curly-haired teen whispered, "Dude, can we just go? Please?" But as they turned toward the door, hoping to escape, hoping to disappear, hoping to forget, something unexpected happened. The door to the diner swung open with authority. 3 people walked inside, stepping in with purpose. Uniforms, badges. Not police, sheriff's deputies. The diner fell silent again. The deputies scanned the room, then locked eyes on the teens instantly. The leader's face collapsed in dread. "Oh no, no, not them." The deputy in front nodded respectfully toward Steven. "Mr. Seagal," he said, "we got your message. We've been tracking reports of these boys all week." The teens froze completely, and now, they were truly terrified. For a long moment, the diner felt like it was holding its breath. 5 teenagers sat frozen in the booth, their backs straight, their eyes pinned to Steven Seagal as if he were a storm that had decided mercifully not to strike again. The room stayed quiet except for the soft clatter of a spoon somewhere in the kitchen and the low hum of the ceiling fan. Steven stood beside their table, not towering, not puffing himself up, not trying to look threatening. He didn't need to. The calm in his eyes was enough to make the boys swallow hard. A waitress whispered to another. I knew he looked familiar. A customer pulled out his phone and mouthed silently, "Is that really Steven Seagal?" Someone else nodded, eyes wide, confirming what the teens now feared. The leader of the group, Austin, couldn't even lift his head. His fingers trembled on the table, still stained with the drink he had spilled earlier. He felt the eyes of everyone in the diner burning into his back. Shame settled on him heavier than fear. Steven finally broke the silence. "Do you know why you're scared right now?" he asked, his voice low, steady, and so calm that it almost unsettled them more than if he had shouted. None of the boys answered. Finally, Austin shook his head. Steven looked around the diner before returning his gaze to them. "Because for the first time today, you realize something important." The boys stared, waiting. "You realized you don't control the world the way you think you do. You don't get to walk into places and disrespect people just because a phone is recording. You don't get to take someone's food and laugh like it means nothing. You don't get to make a mess and expect others to clean it up. His words weren't loud, but they landed like weight on every heart at the table. You think toughness is loud, Steven continued. You think it's about showing off, acting big, making noise. But real strength, he pointed to his chest, is quiet. It's discipline, respect, awareness. And you boys don't have that yet. Austin opened his mouth as if to speak but couldn't form a single word. One of the boys beside him wiped his eyes discreetly, hoping no one noticed. Steven leaned slightly closer. You think you were lucky today? You were. But not because I didn't hurt you. He paused. You're lucky because now you have a chance to grow from this, instead of become the kind of men who ruin their own lives. The words punched harder than any kick ever could. The boys lowered their eyes, unable to meet his. Steven straightened and looked toward the mess they had caused earlier, the overturned drink, the scattered napkins, the torn sandwich on the floor. Get up, he said quietly. They all stood immediately, almost too fast, bumping into each other. You're going to clean this place, Steven said. Every piece, every spill, every bit of what you threw around like children. No one protested, no one rolled their eyes, no one even sighed. They moved faster than they ever had in their lives, gathering napkins, wiping tables, sweeping the floor. The waitress brought them a mop, and they took turns, pushing it across the tile with stiff, embarrassed movements. They weren't the loud teens who barged in earlier. Now they were careful, gentle, focused. The customers watched, some with amusement, others with relief. The diner felt safe again. At one point, Austin hesitated near Steven. Sir, I'm sorry. The apology was weak, but it was honest. Steven nodded once. Good. But an apology isn't the end. It's the beginning. You want to make up for what you did? Austin nodded quickly. Then remember this moment the next time you feel like doing something stupid for attention. Austin swallowed and nodded again. Once the diner was spotless, cleaner than it had been in years, the 5 boys stood in a line, unsure what came next. Their faces were red, their clothes damp from mopping, and not a single phone was in their hands. Steven walked slowly toward the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. You boys have potential. But potential is useless if you waste it trying to impress people who don't care about you. He pushed the glass door open, sunlight spilling over his shoulders. And one more thing, he said, glancing back with a hint of a smile. If you want to prank someone, prank each other. Leave strangers in peace. The boys nodded again, almost bowing in relief. Then Steven stepped outside, calm and steady as ever, heading toward the parking lot like nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside the diner, the 5 teens stood silent, watching him go, still shaken, still humbled, still unsure how they had survived the most terrifying lesson of their lives. But one thing was clear, their world had changed. When Steven Seagal's silhouette finally disappeared at the far end of the parking lot, the tension that had gripped the diner slowly loosened. People began murmuring again, forks clinked, and the world returned to motion. But at the booth where the 5 boys stood, nothing felt the same. Austin exhaled shakily, rubbing his palms over his face. Guys, what just happened? No one answered, not because they didn't know, but because saying it aloud would make the truth too real. Mason was the first to speak. We almost got destroyed by a legend. Ryan nodded hard. Bro. He moved like he knew everything we were gonna do before we did it. Tyler swallowed loudly. I thought he was gonna break my arm, man. Eli shivered. He didn't even try. And we were done. Their voices were whispers, not daring to rise above the hum of the room, as if speaking loudly might somehow summon Steven back. The waitress approached them, arms crossed, but her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was tired, but softened by the fact that they had cleaned up every crumb. You boys all right? She asked. They nodded quickly. She sighed. You're lucky. A lot of people would have thrown you out, called the police, maybe even pressed charges. But that man gave you a chance. Austin stared at the floor. We know. He didn't humiliate you, she continued. He didn't scream. He could have, but he didn't. Learn from that. The teens nodded again, embarrassed all over. As she walked away, the weight of her words sank in. It wasn't the fight they feared anymore. It was the disappointment, the shame, the realization that they had crossed a line far deeper than they understood. They stepped outside together. The sky was turning orange, the sun dropping behind the hills as if ending the day alongside them. The warm glow didn't comfort them, it only highlighted the silence that hung between them like fog. Austin looked at his phone, which was still recording when everything began. His stomach dropped. Mason leaned over his shoulder. "You're not gonna post that, right?" Austin shook his head instantly. "Dude, no way. If I post this, we'll look like idiots." Ryan exhaled with relief. "Good." But Tyler wasn't convinced. "Even if you don't post it, the footage exists. What if someone saw us? What if someone recognized him?" Austin swiped through the video, then paused. The moment Steven grabbed him, the camera slipped from his hand and landed on the floor, recording nothing but audio. Their faces weren't visible. Steven wasn't visible. Just chaos and screams. Austin clicked delete without hesitation. "Done," he said. Something about that small act, irreversible and deliberate, felt like the first real choice he'd made all day. They walked down the road together. For the first time, no one was pushing, laughing, or showing off. They were quiet, listening to their footsteps instead of each other's egos. Eli finally broke the silence. "Do you think he'll tell someone? Like, the cops or something?" Austin shook his head. "No. If he wanted to, he would've. He wasn't trying to ruin us. He was trying to teach us." "Teach us?" Mason scoffed. "He scared the life out of us." Austin shrugged. "Maybe that's what we needed." The others exchanged uneasy glances. Deep down, they knew he was right. When they reached the park bench where they always hung out, they sank into the seats, exhausted from a day that had seemed like fun only hours ago. Ryan rubbed his temples. "Bro, we seriously gotta stop doing this." "Doing what?" Tyler said, though he knew the answer. "Everything," Ryan muttered. "Messing with people, filming pranks, acting like we're invincible. Today showed us we're not." Austin stared at his hands, remembering how easily Steven had stopped him, how fast, how calm, how controlled. "That guy wasn't even trying," he whispered. "No," Mason added. "But he could have ended us if he wanted." Eli's voice cracked slightly. "Do you think he knew we were just kids?" Austin nodded slowly. "He knew. That's why he didn't go full crazy on us." The boys sat in silence again. Then Austin said something none of them expected. "We should apologize to the diner. Like, properly." Mason blinked. "We already cleaned. Cleaning isn't apologizing," Austin replied. "We were jerks. We scared people. We ruined their peace. The least we can do is go back tomorrow and make it right." Ryan looked hesitant, pride still tugging at him, but eventually he nodded. "Yeah, he's right." One by one, the others agreed. Not because they wanted to, but because the fear from earlier had changed into something deeper. Responsibility. As the sky darkened, the teens walked home in different directions. Austin's neighborhood was quiet except for crickets and the distant bark of a dog, but the silence didn't calm him. Inside his mind, one moment from the diner replayed over and over. Steven's voice. "You don't get to walk into places and disrespect people just because a phone is recording." Austin had heard adults lecture him before. Teachers, parents, store managers, but none of their words ever stuck. This time, they did. He opened his front door quietly, hoping not to draw attention. But his mom was waiting in the living room. Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you look shaken?" Austin hesitated. He thought about lying. He thought about brushing it off, but something inside him shifted for the first time. "Mom," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." And as he began recounting everything, he realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of who he might become. The next morning, the sun rose over Maple Ridge with soft, warm light, the kind that makes everything look calmer than the day before. But for the 5 teens, the night had been long, restless, and filled with echoes of their own actions. Austin barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the diner, Steven's calm face, and himself, standing there like a child who didn't know right from wrong. By 9 a.m., the boys met outside the diner, not with swagger, not with laughter, but with quiet determination. Mason kicked at a tiny stone. "You sure about this?" Austin nodded. "Yeah, we have to." They walked inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The same customers from yesterday were there, older folks sipping coffee, a mother feeding her toddler, the waitress wiping tables. When they looked up and saw the teens again, their bodies stiffened, as if expecting trouble. Austin stepped forward. Hi, he said, voice low but steady. We're not here to bother anyone. We came to apologize. The room fell silent. The waitress crossed her arms, brow raised. Apologize? Austin nodded, and the others followed. Ryan cleared his throat. What we did yesterday was messed up. We were rude, disrespectful, and we scared people, Tyler added. We thought it was funny, but it wasn't. We get that now. The oldest customer, Mr. Grant, the same one who had recorded part of the scene, leaned back in his chair. Boys, he said, you're lucky that man didn't knock some sense into you. Mason swallowed. He kind of did. Without hitting us. The customers exchanged looks. Austin continued. We want to pay for the sandwich we ruined. And the drink. And anything else we messed up. The waitress slowly uncrossed her arms. She studied their faces not for excuses, but for sincerity. Then she nodded. All right, she said gently. Apology accepted. Just don't let me see anything like that again. The boys exhaled, relief washing over them like warm water. Mr. Grant smiled slightly. You boys got a second chance. Don't waste it. They nodded again, quietly. On the way out, Eli said, Man, I feel like a different person. Mason laughed softly. Feels weird, right? Doing the right thing? Yeah, Ryan said. But in a good way. Austin didn't speak. He was deep in thought about Steven, about the fear he felt, and about the calm wisdom in the man's voice. He checked his phone, scrolling back to earlier messages. His friends had kept talking about what happened, about how wild it was, how terrifying it had been. But Austin wasn't thinking about fear anymore. He was thinking about respect, not the kind you demand, the kind you give, and the kind you earn. That afternoon, Austin sat alone on the school bleachers, watching the empty field. The wind brushed lightly against his face, the sun warm on his back. Life felt different, not because Steven Seagal had scared him, but because for the first time, Austin had seen a version of himself he didn't want to be. You don't get to walk into places and disrespect people just because a phone is recording. Those words stayed with him. He took out his phone, opened the camera, stared at his reflection. He didn't see a tough guy. He didn't see a prankster. He saw a kid who wanted to be better. Mason joined him quietly. You're really thinking about him, huh? Austin nodded. Yeah. You think we'll ever see him again? Mason asked. Austin smiled faintly. I don't think it matters. What matters is what we do now. Mason nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right. For the first time in a long time, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Austin walked home with his hands in his pockets. He felt lighter not because his problems were gone, but because he understood something he never had before. Respect isn't about strength. It's about character. Humility isn't weakness. It's power. And sometimes the biggest lessons don't come from teachers, parents, or rules. Sometimes they come from one quiet man eating his lunch, who shows you exactly what kind of person you've become, and what kind you have the potential to be. Before entering his house, Austin whispered to himself, I'm done being the guy who hurts people for laughs. I'm gonna be better. And for the first time in a long time, he meant it.